Hello and welcome to another Academy on Air brought to you by Google Partners. My name is David Whelan. I'm an attribution specialist here in EMEA. I'm joined on the couch today.
Hi, my name is Kelsey Bowers. I'm an attribution product expert here in the UK.
Excellent. As our titles may have suggested, today we are going to be talking, in fact, about AdWords attribution. To go into a little bit more detail as to what our agenda looks like. So we're going to be looking at an attribution overview. We'll also be taking a bit of a deep dive into data-driven attribution. We'll then be looking at how to choose the right attribution model if we do not meet the requirements for data-driven attribution. Kelsey will also be bringing us through a step-by-step guide as to how to implement an attribution model. And then we'll be looking at some common concerns and misconceptions around changing from a last click model to a non-last click attribution model. Finally, we will be wrapping things up with a Q&A. As you can probably see, there is a live chat bar there on your screen. So feel free to populate that throughout. Don't hesitate if you have any questions that you want to ask us, and we will get around to them at the very end. Sound good?
Good.
Excellent. Let's kick it off. Firstly, for a bit of context. So you probably are sick to death of hearing this stat, but nonetheless, what we're seeing is that over half of the web traffic is now coming from smartphones and tablets. So in recent years, we have seen an absolute explosion in the number of devices out there, which means that consumers today now have more than one device to research and purchase on. So this has created an increasingly fragmented customer journey that you as marketers now have to stitch together, understand and assign value to the different touch points along this conversion path. So what we're seeing is that over 90% of people now switch between screens to complete tasks. So typically what we see is they start on a mobile device, they might then go onto a desktop device to do a little bit more research, back to mobile, and then finally convert on either desktop or mobile. So multiple devices here that we need to account for. And also what we're seeing is that 38% of all customer journeys involve more than one channel of interaction, potentially email, display, video, search, of course. All of these different channels now need to be accounted for in the customer journey. So let's look at a quick example of the last time that you might have booked a holiday. Chances are when you sat down to book this holiday, you didn't just use one device, and it didn't just happen in one sitting. Booking a holiday takes a lot of consideration, a lot of time, a lot of thought. Therefore, your path to purchase might have looked a little something like this. Earlier in the week or on the weekends, you may have taken out your phone and started searching for best tropical vacations. And during this, you discovered that Bahamas looks pretty good. Looks like the type of destination that you might enjoy. Good stuff. Let's carry on. Then on Tuesday, you come back, you are on your desktop and you're thinking a little bit more about the Bahamas and where might be suitable accommodation to stay while you're there. So on your desktop, you're searching for a keyword like bed and breakfast in the Bahamas. You see that Paradise Bay in the Bahamas has pretty good ratings. Looks like the type of place that you might want to stay. You bookmark that. And then later in the week, when you're again on your mobile and you're thinking about what Paradise Bay might actually be, you want to maybe check out some traveler reviews and traveler photos to verify that this is the right option. So indeed, you search for Paradise Bay in Bahamas in your Google search on your mobile. Finally, on Friday, you're sitting down to lunch and you've decided, yep, I want to go to the Bahamas and I want to stay in Paradise Bay B&B. So you type it in, you go to the website and you book it. There you go. I mean, over the course of the week, 2 different device types and 4 different touch points, you finally managed to book the holiday of your dreams. So as I alluded to, this user journey tends to be a lot more fragmented than it used to be. Different days, times, devices, keywords, touch points, all leading eventually to that reservation or to whatever transaction we may be concerned about. What we're seeing is that many advertisers are actually still concerned about that last interaction before the conversion takes place. They're not actually considering further back in time and taking into account all of the different touch points leading up to that transaction. AdWords attribution ultimately helps us connect all of these different touch points together to allow us to understand the customer journey better and assign conversion credit beyond the last touch point. So let's take a better look into AdWords attribution. So to help us understand attribution, we were going to take it back one step and just take a look at our measure, attribute, and act framework, because we do love frameworks here in Google. So to start with measure. So all measuring means is that we are correctly tracking all of the conversion types that matter to our business. Not just the big macro conversions, but also the micro conversions that lead up to these larger transactions. Next up, we have attributes. So are we valuing all of the different touch points in the customer journey? Are we shifting away from that last click approach to a non-last click attribution model? And then finally, all of this is pretty useless unless we're actually acting on the data and the insights that we're attaining from measuring and attributing. So we need to make sure that we're taking this data and insights and optimizing towards it and improving our campaign's performance off the back of it. So we're not going to dwell too much on measurements here, but it's always important just to make sure that we have good hygiene and that we actually fully understand all of the different touch points within the user flow before someone clicks on an ad, right to the point when they actually convert on our website. So make sure that you understand all of these different interactions when someone is on your website, what they're doing, what they're viewing on the website, how they're clicking on the ad, and ultimately what they're converting on. So again, making sure that you have conversion tracking set up in AdWords for all of the relevant conversions. Again, not just the big ones, but also the micro ones leading up to the macro conversions. So as we said, today is going to be mostly around the attribution. So we're going to go into a lot more detail now on the various Google attribution models that we have in AdWords. So firstly, let's take a quick look at our definition of what an attribution model actually is to make sure that we're all fully aligned on that concept. So an attribution is simply a rule or a set of rules that determines how conversion credit is assigned to touch points along the conversion path. Pretty simple. So think back to us booking a holiday earlier on. So we had these 4 different touch points. AdWords attribution ultimately helps us connect all of these different touch points together and look at how they actually ended up in that reservation, allowing us to book a holiday. So our first click is essentially the click that introduced us to the entire customer path. So this was our click on mobile on Sunday at AM, where we searched for best tropical vacations. The last click is the one that happened directly before we actually made the reservation. So this was on Friday when we on our desktop actually booked or clicked on the ad for Paradise Bay, Bahamas, and actually ended up booking that. And then we had the 2 clicks in between, which brought together the whole thing between the first click and the last click. So you're probably asking the question, which of these touch points is actually the most important, which is a pretty valid question. So we have 6 different AdWords attribution models available. Firstly, we have last click. Now, last click has been the default option on AdWords for quite some time now. Up until a year and a half ago, it was actually the only attribution model that was available on AdWords. But because of the reasons that I've went through earlier on, the explosion, the number of devices, the highly fragmented user journeys, it's now no longer feasible to just look at this last click model. But nonetheless, a last click model only allows us to value 100% of the conversion credit on the last interaction before the conversion takes place. First click, similarly a static model that allows us to give 100% of the conversion credit to the very first interaction. So remember when I was looking at best tropical holiday destinations on my mobile, that would take 100% of the conversion credit in this instance. Next up, we have 3 more rules-based models. So we have linear, we have time decay, and we have position-based. A linear model looks to assign equal conversion credit to each individual touch point along the path. A time decay model looks to give the most conversion credit to the freshest clicks, aka the last click. And then in descending order, it'll assign less and less conversion credit. Next up, we have position-based. Now, position-based allows us to assign equal conversion credit to the first and the last click, and then the clicks in between will have equal credit across. Finally, we have the golden child of AdWords attribution models. This is our data-driven model. Kelsey is going to be going into this in more detail. For now, all you need to know is that data-driven looks to assign conversion credit to individual keywords along a conversion path, depending on the impact that they've had in that conversion. So ultimately, we must move away from a last click model. What we're seeing is that we now live in a world where a last click model simply won't cut it. We need to start valuing up the funnel and start using a non-last click model. By moving away from a last click model, it'll allow us to get more conversions on average at a similar cost per conversion. So through an internal Google study, we've seen that on average, we have a 5% uplift in the amount of conversions when DDA is applied at a similar cost per conversion. So quick recap on the models. We have last click, we have first click, then we have linear, time decay, and position-based. These 5 are known as our rule-based models. These are static models. And then finally, we have our dynamic data-driven attribution models, which leverages machine learning, which Kelsey is going to go into in a lot more detail.
Perfect. So let's go ahead and get into data-driven. So as Dave said, this is our golden child, and this is the one that we typically recommend. You've probably heard us talk the most about. So we want to get into why that's such a great model. So first, you want to break it down and talk about what data-driven actually is. And you might also hear us refer to it as DDA, because we like to acronym everything here. So with data-driven, we recommend this one because it's the only attribution model that actually takes into account your data. What it will do is take all of your account data, so what's happening with all of your clicks and conversions, run that through Google's machine learning algorithms, and then it will assign fractional credit across the various touch points based on how they actually contributed to the path. And the great thing about this one is that it will actually learn and adjust over time. So as the seasons change, as you get more data coming in, and as conversion cycles change over time, it will be able to update it with you without you having to change any additional settings here. Now, the one caveat here is that, as we said, we use your data and we need a lot of it for it to actually work. So at the moment, the minimum requirements are 600 conversions and 15,000 clicks per conversion action to be eligible for a DDA attribution action. And so I want to go ahead and break that down a little bit more to understand how that actually works. So as I said, there's a huge amount of data that we require. So it will actually break down all of those different clicks. So 15,000 clicks and 600 conversions worth of interactions. And what it will do is actually look at each individual click string. So as going back to the example that Dave gave earlier, what we're actually going to do is take a look at that example here. So the click string here would be those 3 clicks that led to the conversion, and it will look at the conversion right here. Then what it does is it goes out and finds a similar path that has very similar interactions. So as you can see here, the second and the third click are the exact same keyword in the exact same order. The only difference here is the first click. So what we'll do then is assign the difference in the conversion performance to that change in the path. And what we'll do is do this again and again and again over all 15,000 credits. And it's going to be updated in real time as well. So as you get more data, it's going to continue to change. And so what this will eventually come out to is a custom attribution model that's based on the data in your account. If you do want to get more into this, I know this is a very simple example. We do have a white paper that's available in the AdWords Help Center if you want to read more about it. So that's data-driven, which is a really great model. But what happens if you're not eligible for data-driven, which is a very common problem across a lot of conversion actions, especially if you don't get a huge amount of traction going through them. So not to worry, there are still some really great models left. So as Dave said, we've got left with the 5 different rules-based models. So we're going to rule out first and last click. And if you take nothing else away from today, know that first and last click are not models that you should be choosing to track your conversion actions, because they're only going to look at one touch point in the conversion funnel, and that's really not how people are searching anymore. So what we're going to do is take the other 3 rules-based models here and decide which it is based on the goals within your account. So I think to break it down and figure out which of these models would be best for your business, we want to go back and understand what they do and how they assign credit to the various conversion paths. So first, let's start with time decay. So as Dave said earlier, the last click in the path is going to get the most credit, and you're going to see progressively less credit as you go down. So this one is going to be the most similar to a last click model that you'll see in the account. And it's going to be good if you have a very conservative growth strategy, because it's not going to give as much value to those earlier stages in the funnel. On the opposite side of the spectrum, you have position-based, and that's going to assign equal credit, so 40% each to the first and the last click in the conversion path, and then the remaining 20% will be assigned to any clicks that happen in between. And with this one, because you're giving equal value to that first interaction, so that first time that you met that individual in the purchase path and the last time before they purchased, because you're giving equal credit to both of those, it's really good if you're a growth-oriented strategy, because you're giving such a strong amount of conversions to that first interaction in the path.
So what I like about this, I mean, any, say, new businesses looking to kind of establish a brand, acquire new customers, have more of an aggressive growth strategy early on in their, I guess, lives, we're looking at position-based, because we want to value that kind of first interaction with a newly acquired customer greater than, I guess, the ones that come after it. Whereas time decay, as you were saying, closer to last click, therefore we're valuing the last interaction more, therefore it lends itself to a more conservative growth strategy. And we don't mean companies who don't want to grow fast or like who want to stay small. It's more just maybe more established companies like big box retailers, things like that.
Exactly. Yeah, it's all about how you value if someone comes into your conversion path or not.
Okay.
And then I would say that the last one that we've got here then is linear, and this one is going to assign equal credit to every single touch path in between. So this is really good if you're not really sure where you fit here. So maybe you've got a brand new account and you have no idea what the data is and you're not quite sure what the growth strategy is yet, then you can go ahead and go with linear. So hopefully you've understood here which model to choose for your business. As I said, if you have some more questions about it, you can reach out to your Google team or check the Help Center if you want to dive a bit more into it. But with this, then we've got your attribution model selected, and this stands for any of the rules-based models or DDA. We're ready to go ahead and actually implement it. An implementation, there's going to be several slides here that I'm going to go through, but it's actually a really, really quick and simple way to do it. You can do it in just a few minutes. So to actually implement it, what you have to do is go into the AdWords account and navigate to the wrench. We're going to be using the new version of AdWords, so hopefully you've updated already. So you go ahead and go into the wrench, and then under the measurement section, you want to go under conversions. And once you go into conversions, what you'll see is all of your conversion actions. And as I said, this is going to have to be updated for each individual conversion action. So you'll have to do this multiple times. You can't just do it across the account as a whole. So go ahead and select the one conversion action that you want to change. And once you click into that, you'll see the settings. In the bottom right-hand corner, you're going to click on Edit Settings. And this will pull up several different options. You want to go to the very last one here under Attribution Model and click on the drop-down. And then you'll go ahead and see another drop-down here, and it will be set on whichever attribution model you're currently using. So if you haven't changed anything, that's defaulting to last click. So you can go ahead and click on that drop-down. And then you'll be able to see all the different options available. So all of those rule-based models that we went through will always be available. And data-driven, as I said, have those specific data requirements. So if you meet those data requirements, what you'll see is what's on the screen now with the data-driven. It's the same color as the other options, and you can go ahead and click on it.
So with data-driven, again, 600 conversions, 15,000 clicks in a 30-day period. Mm-hmm. If we don't have that, it's not going to appear like this, right?
Yep, exactly. And it is real time. So if you get to 600 conversions today, you might want to give it a few days for the system to catch up. So it may not be exactly on it, but that's the amount of data that we're going to look at.
Nice.
And again, this is coming from search and shopping only. So it's only going to look at those data. All of the actions that we've talked about today is for search and shopping. It will always default to last click for display for the moment.
Good stuff. So in under 30 seconds, you can essentially change from a last click model.
Exactly.
No excuses.
No excuses. Perfect. So you can go ahead and do data driven. And then, as I said, if it's not eligible, then it will look something like this, where it's a lighter gray there, and you'll have the little yellow rectangle next to it that says it's not eligible. So once you're in here, go ahead and click, choose the model that you want for that individual conversion action, select it, hit save, and done. And that's it. You've got your conversion action updated. So I think that's it for how to actually set up the attribution model, how it works. Hopefully you've got a pretty good understanding of how that's working right now. So what we want to do is go through some common concerns and misconceptions that we've been hearing from our advertisers. So Dave, do you want to go ahead and click off?
Yeah, sure. So that was really interesting. I thought it was really good to know like how easy it is firstly to change. As you were saying, there is some common concerns and misconceptions. So one that I usually hear actually from agencies is I changed the attribution models and all of a sudden my conversions fell off a cliff. What actually happened here? So it's important to note that the conversions aren't lost or not completely gone. We've simply adjusted them by using a non-last click model. So important that we are able to compare accurately when we're looking to compare our previous performance history. And one of the main things that to ensure accuracy in our comparison is that we are looking to use a current model, which can be found in using the segment tool in the AdWords interface. So important to remember here that before the day of the change, our data on AdWords is still going to be using the last click model. And therefore, if we're looking at the days that come after the day of the change, what we're going to see is a non-last click model. So important that we're not comparing those two, and we're actually comparing using current model in the segmentation tool. So next, we need to set the expectation as well that by moving to a non-last click model, conversions are going to shift. They're going to shift across keywords, they're going to shift across campaigns, and they're also going to shift across devices. So let's be prepared for that shift. Finally, it's important to understand how we actually compare in terms of the date range. So if we are looking at a particularly short date range, but we are working with a longer conversion cycle, then these two things are misaligned. And to go into this in a little bit more detail, we have this illustration here. Excellent. So we see that with large amounts of conversions and long conversion paths, you may see a decrease in conversions the day of the change itself. Now, the reason for this is the whole principle behind a non-last click attribution model is we're sending conversion credit back in time, which means that the day that we make that change, we have essentially sent conversion credit back to the days preceding that day, depending on how long, of course, our conversion window actually is. But don't be too concerned about this because we do have backfill, which means that in the days that come after the day of the change, we will see that conversion credit will be sent backwards, and therefore conversion credit will lift again after one conversion cycle. So let's make sure that we're using a long enough time range to review performance history, and we're taking into account that conversions will drop off just on the day of the change, but then they will increase again in the days preceding that.
Yeah. And I would say the other thing to consider too is the day that you change, the conversion action is only going to change from the time you hit save. So let's say you decide to change right after this and you're going to change your conversion at noon. Any conversions that happened before noon on that day will still be stuck on that old model. So if I click on it at 11:59 and convert it 12:01 right after you've made that change, I'm still going to be on the last click model because that's when I clicked on the ad. So you might see some differences in conversions just on that day. It might look a little bit weird as it redistributes to the new model.
Exactly.
Perfect. Great. Okay, so AdWords attribution is set up so we cannot easily update our bids multiple times a day. That's correct. That's true against the non-last click models and also with the last click model. None of our attribution models can actually give you data for you to update in real time. it's not a best practice that we would recommend. So if you are looking to do any real-time bidding, we'd actually recommend using smart bidding. That's the only tool that's going to be able to adjust in real time if you're looking to change bids or update bids on the day.
Excellent. What about the extent of smart bidding in terms of it being so much better, I guess, than the manual bidding? Let's talk about the number of signals that it actually takes into account.
Yeah, so smart bidding is actually going to take into account 70 million different signals. It can pull in at every single second, and it can use any combination of those in the platform. And as I said, that's the only one that's going to have insight into that individual action. So it's going to be able to know who's searching your ad, what kind of behavior they've been doing beforehand, and how they match with people who've previously converted on your site. So a lot of data that you're just not going to be able to access if you're trying to update the bids yourself.
Good stuff. Excellent. Okay, so another common question that I get is, all of this sounds great. Can I test it on individual campaigns or keywords? Important here to understand, I think it was mentioned earlier by Kelsey, but to ultimately understand that we change an attribution model at a conversion type level, which means that we can't set this up at campaigns level or at keywords level. It needs to be done at conversion type level. Now, what I would recommend is, for instance, if you have a MCC with multiple child accounts, that you look at testing it on one of those individual accounts before you actually scale it across to the rest of the accounts within that MCC. Alternatively, if you only have one account and you have multiple conversion action types within that, that perhaps maybe you change your conversion model to a non-last click model on one individual conversion type before actually scaling that across. So for instance, you might look to track leads, you might look to track transactions in the same account, potentially because we usually see that advertisers have more leads than transactions. You might test it out on the leads before rolling it out to transactions.
Yeah, and it's also important to note too that this is AdWords attribution. So if you're tracking anything in analytics, that's still going to stay at a last click model. It's only going to be changing the conversions that are actually in AdWords.
Yeah, exactly.
Great. So I guess hopefully today you've understood why attribution is important and why you should go ahead and make the change. So if you feel comfortable enough, we definitely encourage you to make the change soon. You can definitely go out and do it today if you want to. If you do have more questions, you can check out the AdWords Help Center for more information, or reach out to your Google team if you've got more questions. And then if you do feel comfortable, you can go ahead and actually start ask us some questions. As I said, if you go into the chat bar on your screen, you can go ahead and start populating some questions. So we'll go ahead, and if you want to switch over to the questions. Perfect. Great. Okay, so we're going to just run through these if that's all right with you. So the first one is, what is the eligibility for data-driven model? So with that, it's again at the individual conversion action. We're going to be looking at search and shopping data specifically, and you have to have 600 conversions and 15,000 clicks to turn on. And then to maintain the data-driven, once you've got it enabled, they're going to look at around 400 conversions and 10,000 clicks for you to maintain it within a 30-day time frame.
Good stuff. Yeah, so one of the other questions that we have here is, how do you advise we report on decimal conversions to clients? For example, if the campaign got 20.59 conversions in terms of signups, it does not seem logical to say that we had decimal numbers of signups. I think what's important to hear is that we look at conversions as a whole. So for instance, when we are looking at it, that when we are looking at conversions, that we're looking over a slightly longer time period perhaps, and that we are setting the expectation with the clients of how non-last click actually works, and the fact that we are going to see decimal conversions, and just explaining to them the rationale behind this. And because I guess when we send conversion credit backwards, that we don't actually send the whole conversions. I'm not sure if you have anything that you want to add to that as well.
Yeah, I think with this one, it's really about explaining to the client why we're using this. So it's very similar to a couple years ago, why you had to sell in the importance of mobile, and that was very painful because they didn't necessarily see the value in that. It's the same idea with attribution. We're just trying to play catch up to what the users are already doing. So we're using that and explaining why we're using a non-last click model there. And as he said, if you're using if you look back at a broader date range, you should still have a whole number of conversions. And if you're really concerned about decimal places, you can always just report from analytics, which will stay on a last click basis and should have whole numbers of conversions.
Yeah, sounds good.
Sound about right. Perfect. Okay, let's see here. Going to pull up the questions. So let's see here. When we changed the attribution model to the existing account, the number of conversions decreased badly. How can we share the same with the client to wait for at least 2 weeks to get the performance? Perfect. So with this one, I think, again, you might want to actually look at reporting from Google Attribution, I would say is the big one, because you won't see the difference in conversions there.
Sorry, Google Analytics.
Oh, right? Yeah, sorry, Google Analytics. We've got too many GIs here. So you definitely want to look at Google Analytics there for reporting, because that you shouldn't see any drop-off in conversions. I'd also recommend looking at your date range, because you might have seen conversions, especially if you have a very long conversion cycle, they might have been populated back in earlier in the month. So you might want to look at reporting. And we typically recommend, in terms of reporting, you would report sort of the number of days of your conversion cycle, which you can find under the search attribution tool in the account. Report the number of days after. So if it's a 5-day conversion path, for example, instead of reporting out on the first of the month, which will still be collecting data from your new model, try reporting out on the 5th of the month. So we do have that full data, and it shouldn't look like there's a decrease in conversions.
Yeah. So really good question as well. And I touched on a couple of elements earlier on in the session. And I think one of the big ones, especially when we're seeing, as Kelsey said, these like longer conversion paths, they tend to send the conversion credit back outside of the conversion window that we have set in our reporting, which may actually attribute towards a decrease in the conversions that we're seeing, not a loss, but a decrease. So important to understand everything that's going on here in terms of like what is your client's average conversion path, how long does that take, and that we're taking that into account then when we're actually doing our reporting. Because the chances are there is a very good reason why we're seeing a slight drop off in conversions.
Correct. Cool. So let's take this one. How would this work if you're using mostly dynamic search ads, which don't have keywords? So I think the thing to note with attribution is we're not just looking at keywords. That is something that we're looking at, but we're also looking at the different campaigns and ad groups and ads that are working as well. So we're going to be able to tell where dynamic search ads typically fall within the funnel, and going to be able to assign credit that way as well. So we will still take into account dynamic search ads. Those won't be ignored by any means. You just obviously won't see the changes in keywords that you might see in some of the other campaigns.
Good stuff.
Perfect.
One here that I want to touch on, I think it's a good one. What are the best practices of assessing performance after moving from last click to data driven? Again, I think actually to touch on what I would recommend would be the entire setup range. So firstly, we need to make sure that we're using kind of like a pre-control period. So I would usually leave it for 2 weeks, depending on what the average conversion cycle is for your client, but leave it up to anything between 2 conversion cycles to 2 weeks before you actually make that change. Then turn on data-driven attribution, then allow for 2 weeks plus an average conversion cycle before you're using automated bidding. So for instance, if you're using a target CPA model, before you activate that you're allowing enough time there. And then again, that you're allowing enough time after you've activated automated bidding for the bidding algorithm to adjust. Now, I realize that like between 4 and 6 weeks is a long time to wait before you assess the performance, but I think it's absolutely necessary to not go changing a huge amount around the campaigns. And by having that control period, you're able to also allow for kind of enough time for the campaigns to settle, and you have then an accurate comparison before you actually set up DDA. So yeah, do you have anything else there around?
Yeah, I would say the big thing there is to make sure that when you do change it, you don't want to change it around a big period of change. So, if you're a retailer, probably the Black Friday period is a good time to avoid. Any time that you're going to have some very big differences in conversions, because it's going to be hard. So try and find a time to change it that's going to be keeping it fairly smooth as well.
Yeah,
Perfect.
and just again, like making sure that you're measuring apples for apples. So using the current model, as I said earlier, is incredibly important, because if you look at the day of change, all of the days before that will still be using a last click model. So there's really no point in us measuring now compared with then. So what we need to do is make sure that we're using current model when we're looking back in time.
And just to flag that too, you can find current model if you go in and adjust columns. So if you're looking just at like the conversions and cost per conversion that you have kind of standard in the account, that's going to be looking at the two different conversion models. So it's not going to be apples to apples. What you need to do is go in and adjust your columns. So if you adjust your columns under attribution, there should be new columns that'll say conversion current model, and that will be able to look back at the data as if it was on the new model that you had chosen. So you will actually be able to see what more apples to apples than what you would on a regular conversion action column.
Great. Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, so I'm going to scroll here through some more questions, maybe.
If there's any more.
If I can scroll through here.
Yeah.
Oh, yes, there are. How many did I miss there? Okay.
What is the correct conversion window for car sellers? So assuming that this means kind of, I guess, forecourts and dealerships. It's a good question. So like I would look to like increase this to the absolute maximum, in my opinion. So like making sure that we're taking in the longest conversion window available. Obviously, it's a huge investment, which means that it's going to take into account more consideration from the users, which means that they're going to be going between devices, they're going to have multiple interactions, a lot of researches done for a particular car model before they get to the dealership part. So making sure that you're there at every single stage, but that you set the maximum conversion window for car sellers.
Yeah, I would say with this, and really with anybody, with any client that you're using, there's no one correct conversion window, because everyone's going to track conversions slightly differently. Yeah. So what I would recommend is actually going in and checking in your account to see what the conversion window is and using all of the data there. So when we're talking about conversion window, that's when you go into, again, the wrench under conversions and under search attribution. You should be able to look under paths and look at the time frame there, and that will give you the average path length for what your individual accounts are. And that could be different if you work with multiple car sellers. So I would just look at that, at the data in the account. That's always going to be the best bet there. Perfect. Okay, so let's take the next question. So these models are available for all networks. As we said, no, at the moment, they're only going to be available for search and shopping. They're not available for display and YouTube. So if you do change an attribution model within, if your conversions, you change those in the account, what you'll see is it'll be on the new model that you choose for the search campaigns, and then display and YouTube will still show as last click.
Cool.
Perfect.
What if conversions are pulled from analytics? So with GA conversions or GA goals that we are importing into AdWords, we will actually still be able to use a non-last click model. So would always advise switching from last click to non-last click within AdWords for any GA goals that you are importing.
Yep, exactly. So basically the summary is those will work exactly like you would if you had just an AdWords conversion tag set up. You can change everything the same. The big difference there is if you then look at that in analytics, there won't actually be any changes in analytics. That's still going to be on a last click model. You'd have to set up a different conversion model if you want to look at it in analytics.
Yeah, and I guess what's good is with AdWords, we have access to using data-driven attribution for GA goals, providing obviously that we meet the requirements of 600 conversions and 15,000 clicks, whereas on Google Analytics, unfortunately, you need GA 360 before you can use a DDA model there.
Exactly. Perfect. Okay, so while the other three models seem to be more practical, what could be the use for first and last click since they're still available options? What can they be used for? So there's still options at the moment, but we really don't recommend using them at all. I haven't really come across any businesses that just have one individual click. It's always 1 point something. I've seen up to 14 clicks for a conversion path. So there really is no use case for a first and last click model. That's still the default at the moment, which is probably why the last click is still in there.
Cool. Where is it now?
trying to get through all these questions here.
So assuming I am starting today, should I choose DDA model and wait for 600 conversions, or does it automatically change to DDA after conversions until such time I can choose another model? So as Kelsey said earlier, this DDA model won't actually be available until you have 600 conversions and 15,000 clicks within a 30-day period. So we won't actually have the opportunity to change within conversion settings until that time. So important that we are kind of reviewing constantly the number of conversions that we have. Once we hit that requisite amount, the 600 conversions and 15,000 clicks, DDA will come available, at which point we definitely recommend that you act straight away, go into the account and make that change in your conversion settings.
Yeah, and I think the big thing to note there is you don't have to wait around for DDA if you are looking to do a last click model. I would actually recommend doing something that has a multi-touch point funnel. So looking at something like position-based or time decay now, so that you can start to see what's happening earlier in the funnel, start to bid more for that, and hopefully build up more conversions over time so that you can get to DDA if that is your goal.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think today, like bottom line, move away from last click, get onto a non-last click model. If you're not eligible for DDA, as Kelsey said, you need to be looking at one of our rules-based models. So not last click, preferably not first click, either time decay, position-based, or linear. Ideally DDA.
Yeah, exactly. Perfect. Okay, let's see if there are.
I think we have time for one more
questions. Oh, there's a lot of questions here.
I think we've been through.
Okay, so what are the advantages of AdWords attribution reporting over GA attribution reports and Google attribution? So Google attribution is a beta and is not available at the moment, but it is coming, so that's the big benefit there. And then for the GA attribution reports, GA does default to last click attribution, and you're really only able to play around with models if you use the attribution modeling tool. So AdWords attribution is going to give you a lot more insight. You're also going to be able to do a lot more with the attribution data that you have in AdWords. For example, looking at bidding strategies and adjusting budgets and everything within the actual tool without having to go back and forth between the tools.
Yeah. I think that's a good point. So clearly we have a lot of different products here. We have 3 good ones here, which attribute in different ways and have their own advantages. As Kelsey said, AdWords really the most actionable at the moment. That's available to everyone until Google attribution is released. I guess with the advantages of GA is that we're able to look cross-channel, so we're ultimately able to look at display video, organic, as well as paid search. However, GA doesn't have cross-device, which AdWords attribution actually does. So the hopes is once Google attribution does get launched, that it'll tie together all of these things between cross-device, cross-channel, as well as a high degree of actionability, which GA lacks and AdWords has, and ultimately be the source of truth.
Perfect. Okay, so when we change last click to position based model, what happens with conversions before the change? Is the attribution structure changed? No, any conversions that you had before you changed will stay on the same model, and anything that happens immediately after the change will be on the new model. As we talked about, updating the columns is going to be important there. Perfect. Okay, so AdWords old interface versus a new one. Any attribution model updates we need to know about? There are significantly more resources available in the new model, looking at all of the different tools, reportings, and models. So I'd definitely recommend looking at it from the new interface if you can. Perfect. And I think that's about it for questions.
No more questions. Good stuff.
No questions.
Okay, guys, so that concludes our Academy on Air on AdWords attribution, brought to you by Google Partners. As we said earlier, all of this information is available on the AdWords Help Center. We would highly advise you to check it out, and for you guys to look into your AdWords accounts, see if you are eligible for DDA. If so, let's make that change. Regardless, though, let's move away from last click and into a non-last click model.
Bye, guys.
Cheers, guys.